Well, hello, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. Today we're going to begin the book of Deuteronomy. That's the final book of the Pentateuch, the five books of Moses. I thought we'd do a little bit of introduction to the book of Deuteronomy. So there's no readings associated with this particular video, though the readings will come with the next one. The book of Deuteronomy actually begins in the 40th year of what should have been an 11-day or so journey. The book clarifies and explains to a new generation of Israelites what God delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. Thus, the title, A Copy of the Torah, or a copy of the teachings, is probably more appropriate than to call it the second law, as the title Deuteronomy actually suggests. Indeed, the Hebrew title for the book is essentially These Are the Words. Those are actually the first words of the book, and that's the way the Hebrews refer to it. The book has even less action, if you will, than Numbers does. We're going to view the book really as three sermons through which Moses teaches and instructs. That's the meaning of the word Torah, to teach or to instruct, teachings or instructions. So through these three sermons, Moses teaches and instructs those who were not around, or at the very least were too young to remember the events at Mount Sinai that led to this 40-year delay in entering the Promised Land. Deuteronomy emphasizes the grace that God shows in Israel's election and the gift of land that he gives them, without teaching that others have been rejected. Indeed, Israel's election and placement in this particular land is for the express purpose of drawing others also to God. We'll see many parallels between Moses and Christ as we read this book. Moses is shown as the suffering servant, an intercessor, a teacher, a prophet. All of those things are things that are also said of Christ, as well as there will be a deep concern throughout this book for those that are less fortunate, something that Jesus portrayed as well. Life without Moses, warfare, and finally life in the Promised Land are just around the corner for the children of Israel. In their book, Prepare the Way of the Lord, Lessing and Steinman note that the Pentateuch ends in much the same way that it began. As Adam and Eve stood before the Lord, so this new generation of Israel stands before the Lord now in the plains of Moab. As Adam and Eve were created in God's image and commanded to have dominion over the creation, so Israel is to be God's covenant partner and to subdue the land. And as Adam and Eve were faced with a decision regarding the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so Israel will be faced with a decision about whom they will follow, the Lord and the life he gives, or the ways of the people of the land they are entering and the death it results in. Two other introductory comments that I'd like to make that might be helpful as we read and try to understand this book. First, we need to remember that Israel is a theocracy. There is no separation between church and state, just as there will be no separation between church and state in the new creation when Jesus returns. Civil, ceremonial, and moral law for Israel are inextricably intertwined. There's just no distinction between them. This is kind of foreign to our American experience. So we need not only to remember it as we read, but also understand that this is exactly what God set up. For these were his covenant people who lived for, because of, and through him. Second point I wanted to make is we need to understand that we will be looking at, two basic types of laws or teachings that are contained in these writings. One is very rigid. Thou shalt not steal, period. That's all there is to it. They're basically black and white. Either you have broken that law or you haven't, or you've disobeyed that teaching or you haven't. They're called apodictic, which means clearly demonstrated, unarguable. The other are laws, really decisions or verdicts that arise from individual cases. They deal with a certain set of circumstances, and they serve as guides or precedents for future situations. They're called casuistic laws and are generally preceded by something that indicates that they're conditional. For example, um, it might say, if such and such, then whatever the verdict is. It's important to understand which type of instruction you're dealing with as you're reading so that you don't get off on the wrong foot. Fortunately, it's generally rather clear whether the instruction is apodictic or casuistic. The aim of Deuteronomy is to lead Israel to affirm the covenant God has made with them and to live faithfully in it. The motivation for this life of faithfully obeying the covenant, the motivation is love. God's love for Israel motivates her to obey him out of love. Though we often see reward and punishment associated with the teachings, these are rewards of grace, not rewards of merit. God makes promises to encourage Israel, not to compensate her as she lives in response to the redemption, the salvation that she's already received, namely deliverance from Egypt and the gift of a prosperous land. It's the same way with us. We obey God not to be saved, but in thanksgiving and love for already being saved. May God be with you and bless you. A second video today follows this, where we will begin our reading of Deuteronomy chapters 1 and 2.